Long ago, in a land of hills and valleys, two groups of people were at war. One group was called the Israelites. They believed in God and tried to follow his ways. The other group was called the Philistines. They worshipped different gods and were often enemies with the Israelites. These two armies stood on opposite hills, ready for a big fight. A wide valley lay between them, green and quiet for now, but soon it might be filled with the sounds of battle. The soldiers waited, watching each other. The sun rose high each morning, shining down on the two camps. The Israelite soldiers would look across the valley. They saw the tents of the Philistines, a sea of them. They could hear the sounds of their enemies, sharpening swords and preparing for war. Fear was a cold feeling in the hearts of many Israelite soldiers. They knew the Philistines were strong and fierce fighters. They prayed to God for help and for courage to face what was coming. They hoped for a sign, for a hero, for peace. The air was thick with waiting. Days passed and still no big battle started. It was like a long, quiet breath before a loud shout. The tension grew, like a string pulled tighter and tighter. Each side wanted to win, but each side was also afraid of losing. The land itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what would happen. The birds still sang in the trees and the wind whispered through the grass, but the men were quiet, their faces serious and worried. They were far from their homes and families. The Israelites remembered stories of God helping them in the past. They knew God was powerful, but sometimes when danger is very close, it is hard to remember everything you believe. The Philistine army looked so big, so ready. The Israelite soldiers talked in hushed voices. They asked each other, "What will happen? Who will save us?" They needed someone brave. They needed someone to remind them that God was with them, even when they faced a very big enemy across the valley. Then, from the Philistine camp, a giant man came out. His name was Goliath, and he was from a place called Gath. He was taller than any man the Israelites had ever seen. He was like a walking tower, strong and mighty. He wore heavy armor made of bronze that shone in the sun. His helmet was bronze, and he carried a huge spear. The head of his spear alone was very heavy, made of iron. Even the strongest Israelite soldier would struggle to lift it. Every morning and every evening, Goliath would walk out into the valley. He would stand there, big and terrifying. His voice was like thunder. It rolled across the valley and shook the hearts of the Israelite soldiers. He would shout a challenge to them. "Why are you all hiding?" he would roar. "Send out one man to fight me. If he kills me, we will be your servants. But if I kill him, then you will be our servants and serve us." This challenge made the Israelites very afraid. For 40 long days, Goliath shouted his challenge. 40 days, the Israelites listened to his terrible voice. No one dared to go out and fight him. The soldiers of Israel, even the brave ones, felt their courage melt away like snow in the sun. King Saul, their leader, was also very troubled. He was the tallest of all the Israelites, but even he was afraid of Goliath. The whole army felt weak and helpless. They did not know what to do against such a huge and fearsome enemy who mocked them day after day. Goliath would laugh when no one answered his call. His laughter was a cruel sound. He would say, "I stand here today and insult the armies of Israel. Give me a man so we can fight." He made the Israelites feel small and ashamed. They were God's people, but they were too scared to defend God's name against this giant. The shadow of Goliath seemed to cover the whole camp, making everyone feel hopeless and alone. They prayed, but their fear was still very big. Far away from the battlefield in the town of Bethlehem lived a young boy named David. He was not a soldier, he was a shepherd. He took care of his father's sheep. David was the youngest of 8 brothers. His older brothers were soldiers in King Saul's army facing Goliath. David spent his days in the fields watching the sheep. He made sure they had fresh grass to eat and clean water to drink. He protected them from wild animals like lions and bears. David was young, but his heart was strong and brave. He loved God very much. When he was alone in the fields with his sheep, he would often sing songs to God. He played a small harp, and his music was beautiful. He trusted God with all his heart. He knew that God was always with him, watching over him, just like he watched over his sheep. He believed that God was bigger and stronger than any problem, any danger, or any giant in the world. His faith was simple and very deep. He had learned many lessons in the quiet fields. He learned to be patient while watching the sheep. He learned to be watchful for any danger. He learned to be brave when a wolf or a lion came near the flock. He had fought off these fierce animals to keep his sheep safe. He did not do this with his own strength alone. He believed God gave him the strength and the courage he needed. These experiences made him strong, not just in his body, but in his spirit too. So, while his brothers stood trembling before Goliath, David was faithfully doing his job. He was thinking about God's goodness and power. He did not know yet that God had a very special plan for him. He did not know that his simple faith, learned in the shepherd's fields, would soon be tested in a way he could never imagine. He was just a boy, but he had the heart of a true hero because he trusted in the Lord his God. One day, David's father, Jesse, called him. Jesse was an old man, and he worried about his 3 oldest sons who were in the army. "David," he said, "I want you to go to the army camp. Take this roasted grain and these 10 loaves of bread for your brothers. Also, take these 10 cheeses to the commander of the unit. See how your brothers are doing and bring back some news from them. Let me know they're safe." David listened carefully to his father. David was an obedient son. Early the next morning he got up. He left the sheep with another shepherd. He packed the food his father had given him and started his journey. It was a long walk to the valley where the army was camped. He was probably excited to see his brothers and the army. Perhaps he was also a little curious about the war he had heard people talking about. He carried his shepherd's staff and maybe his trusty sling, which he used to protect his sheep. When David arrived at the camp, it was a busy place. He found the soldiers just as they were going out to their battle positions. They were shouting the war cry, trying to be brave. David ran to the battle lines to find his brothers. He greeted them and asked them how they were. He wanted to give them the food from their father. He wanted to hear their stories. He had arrived at a very important moment, a moment when history was about to change. As David was talking with his brothers, something happened. Goliath, the giant Philistine, came out from his camp. He walked into the valley just like he did every day. He began to shout his usual proud and insulting words to the army of Israel. "Choose a man to fight me," he boomed. When the Israelite soldiers saw Goliath and heard his terrible voice, they all ran away in great fear. They did not want to listen to his words. They did not want to face him. David saw the soldiers running. He heard Goliath's loud, mocking shouts. He could not believe what he was seeing and hearing. He felt a fire light up inside him. This giant was insulting not just the army of Israel, but also the God of Israel. David was not a soldier trained for war, but his heart was filled with a different kind of strength. It was the strength that came from his deep faith in God. He was surprised that no one was standing up to this giant. David turned to the soldiers standing near him. He asked them, "What will be done for the man who kills this Philistine and takes away this shame from Israel? Who is this uncircumcised Philistine anyway, that he should dare to defy the armies of the living God?" David's words were strong. He called God the living God. He believed God was real and powerful, not like the stone idols the Philistines worshipped. His question showed his courage and his deep offense at Goliath's words. The soldiers told David about the reward King Saul had promised. They said, "The king will give great riches to the man who kills Goliath. He will also give him his daughter to marry, and his father's family will not have to pay taxes in Israel." This was a great reward, but it seemed no one was brave enough to try and earn it. Fear of Goliath was much bigger than the desire for riches or honor in the eyes of most soldiers there. They were focused on the giant's size, not God's power. David's oldest brother, Eliab, heard him talking with the soldiers. Eliab was angry with David. He said, "Why did you come down here, and with whom did you leave those few sheep in the wilderness? I know how proud you are and how wicked your heart is. You came down only to watch the battle." Eliab did not understand David's heart. He thought David was just being nosy or looking for excitement, but David was moved by something much deeper, his love for God and his country. Section 6. Before the king, a shepherd's plea. David did not let his brother's angry words stop him. He continued to ask about Goliath. He kept saying that someone should fight the giant. His words were full of courage and faith. Soon some soldiers heard what David was saying. They thought his words were interesting, perhaps even inspiring. They went and told King Saul about this young man who was not afraid of Goliath. King Saul was probably desperate for any sign of hope, so he sent for David. David was brought before King Saul. The king looked at David. He saw a young shepherd boy, not a trained warrior. David was probably small compared to the soldiers around him, and certainly tiny compared to Goliath. King Saul might have felt a little disappointed. How could this boy do what his whole army could not? But David stood tall, his eyes shining with belief. He spoke to the king with respect, but also with great confidence in God. David said to Saul, "Let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Your servant will go and fight him." Imagine the surprise in King Saul's court. A young shepherd offering to fight the fearsome giant whom all the trained soldiers feared. Saul looked at David and replied, "You are not able to go out against this Philistine and fight him. You're only a young man, and he has been a warrior from his youth." Saul saw the outward appearance, David's youth versus Goliath's experience and size, but David did not give up. He told King Saul about his life as a shepherd. He said, "Your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. When a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it. I struck it and rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck it and killed it. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, because he has defied the armies of the living God." David's past victories were proof of God's help. Section 7. No king's armor, just a sling and stones. King Saul listened to David's brave words. He heard the faith in David's voice. He heard how God had helped David fight lions and bears. Perhaps a little bit of hope started to grow in Saul's heart. He said to David, "Go, and the Lord be with you." King Saul agreed to let David fight Goliath. It was a surprising decision, but maybe David's faith was contagious. Maybe the king thought that perhaps God could work through this young shepherd boy. Then King Saul tried to help David prepare for the fight. He dressed David in his own royal armor. He put a bronze helmet on David's head and gave him his coat of mail. This was the best armor in Israel. It was heavy and strong, but David was not used to wearing such things. He tried to walk around, but he could hardly move. The armor was too big and too clumsy for him. It was made for a king, a grown man, a soldier, not for a shepherd boy. David said to Saul, "I cannot go in these because I'm not used to them." So he took off the king's armor. He knew that his real protection did not come from bronze helmets or heavy coats of mail. His protection came from God. He decided to use the tools he knew best, the tools he had used many times in the fields to protect his sheep. He would trust in what God had already given him and what he knew how to use well. David picked up his shepherd's staff. He went to a nearby stream and chose 5 smooth stones. He put them in his shepherd's bag. With his sling in his hand, he walked out into the valley to meet Goliath. He did not look like a warrior. He looked like a simple shepherd boy, but his heart was filled with courage and a mighty faith in the living God. He was ready to face the giant, not with man's weapons, but with God's strength. Section 8. The Battle of Faith, 1 stone's flight. Goliath saw David coming. He looked at the young boy with his shepherd's staff and bag. Goliath felt insulted. He was a great warrior, a champion, and the Israelites sent a boy to fight him. He shouted at David, "Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks?" He cursed David by his Philistine gods. He thought this would be a very easy fight. He was big and strong, and David was small and seemed to have no real weapons. He was filled with pride and scorn. Goliath roared, "Come here, and I'll give your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field." He was sure he would win. He threatened David, trying to make him afraid, but David was not afraid. He knew God was with him. David's voice was clear and strong as he answered the giant. He did not talk about his own strength or skill. He talked about the power of God. His words were a declaration of his unwavering faith. David called back, "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands. I'll strike you down and cut off your head. This very day I will give the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds and the wild animals. Then the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel." David's words were bold and full of conviction. As Goliath moved closer to attack him, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet him. He reached into his shepherd's bag. He took out 1 smooth stone. He put it in his sling. He swung the sling around his head faster and faster. Then he let the stone fly. The stone whizzed through the air, straight and true. It struck Goliath right in the middle of his forehead. The giant stumbled and fell face down on the ground with a mighty thud. The great Goliath was defeated by a shepherd boy with a single stone and a very big faith. Section 9. A mighty fall, a joyful shout, a lasting truth. When Goliath fell, a hush fell over both armies for a moment. It was hard to believe what they had just seen. The giant who had terrified them all for 40 days was lying on the ground, defeated by a young boy. David then ran and stood over Goliath. Since David had no sword of his own, he took Goliath's huge sword and used it to show everyone that the giant was truly defeated. The champion of the Philistines was no more. His reign of terror was over. When the Philistine soldiers saw that their mighty hero was dead, they turned and ran away in fear. Their courage left them completely. The Israelite soldiers, who had been so afraid, suddenly found new strength. They let out a great shout of victory and joy. They chased after the Philistines, and they won a great battle that day. The fear that had gripped them was replaced with celebration. They had seen God work a miracle through a humble shepherd boy. David became a hero in Israel. Everyone sang songs about him and his bravery. But David knew that the victory was not his alone. It was God's victory. He had trusted in God, and God had given him the strength and the skill to defeat the giant. He showed everyone that it is not about how big or strong you are on the outside. What matters is how big your faith is on the inside. God can use anyone, even a young shepherd, to do great things. The story of David and Goliath teaches us a wonderful lesson. It teaches us that courage and faith can overcome even the biggest obstacles. Sometimes we face problems that seem like giants in our lives. They might make us feel small and afraid, but if we trust in God, like David did, God will give us the strength to face them. With God's help, even the smallest person with the strongest faith can win against the greatest challenges. True strength comes from believing in God.